Welcome to my March wrap-up. My March wrap-up game. But first I'm going to start by telling you my 5 favorite reads of the month. 2 of them were ARCs, Advanced Reader Copies, that I got through NetGalley. One was, I think, my absolute favorite read of the whole month, and that was Hello Stranger by Katherine Center. This was the very first Katherine Center book that I have ever read, and I know that a friend on Facebook picked a Katherine Center book, something about happiness, for an upcoming 12 recommendations by 12 friends to read throughout the year books. So I'm really looking forward to that one now. What is that? The Beginning of Happiness? Something like that. I don't remember, but I know it's coming and I'm excited to read another Katherine Center. This one came to me as an advanced reader copy. It's coming out on July 11th and you're going to want to read it. It is so fun, so lighthearted, but also dealing with some really serious like family relationship stuff. It's about a woman who draws portraits for a living and also as a way to stay connected to her deceased mother. And because her mother was also a portrait painter, she paints in like a Norman Rockwell, really kind of warm, glowy, realistic style. And she gets accepted into a competition to paint a portrait, and the winner will receive $10,000 and I don't know, bragging rights. I don't know. But she's really excited about this. And then she suffers a head trauma, which reveals that she's got like an aneurysm and it needs to be dealt with. So they go in to do some brain surgery and the brain surgery causes swelling, which causes the part of her brain that sees faces to no longer be able to kind of register that information, creating in her a case of face blindness, a particular kind of face blindness. There are, the book goes into, and so does the afterword, medical and life realities of living with face blindness and the different ways that it can occur and how people born with face blindness experience it in a completely different way from people who develop it later in life. The whole thing is that this is about brain swelling, and so it may go down. You don't know, she doesn't know throughout the whole thing whether or not she's going to be able to see and recognize faces again. What she sees is she could like hone in on and see an eye, but seeing an eye in relation to the rest of what we assume to be a face is not a possibility for her. It's a confusion of, it's a mess. It's a mess. Remember, though, that she is a portrait artist, and that is her job, to see faces. And so when this is taken away from her right before her ability to see faces is taken away from her right before she's supposed to be painting the portrait that's going to change her whole life for this competition, it's really rough on her. Of course, there's a romance, there's humor, there's comedy, there's family drama. All of these things are happening and it's so well done and it's so great. It reads so quickly. I loved it. It was a great, great story. Feel good, happy ending. It reminded me a lot of Sophie Kinsella, and if you know me and you've been around for a while, you've probably heard me say that she is one of my favorite authors of all time. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Highly recommend. Hello Stranger, Katherine Center, coming out on July 11th. And I just remembered the name of the other Katherine Center book I'm going to get to read real soon is Happiness for Beginners. So I'm looking forward to that one coming up on my TBR in a couple of months. I also have The Bodyguard by Katherine Center now. I have the audio from my library. I haven't listened to it yet, but I downloaded the first Katherine Center book I found from my library after finishing Hello Stranger. It was a great experience. I loved it. The next book in my 5 favorites for the month of March is another ARC, Advanced Reader Copy. This one came to me quite late in the month, and I didn't anticipate that I would love it as much as I did. I thought this is going to be dry, but interesting to me. And that is Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies by Elizabeth Winkler. This comes out on May 9th, so you don't have to wait too long to get your hands on what is not dry in any way, shape, or form. This book is so great. It is a challenge to purists, to Shakespearean purists, to the academics that think that they are the be-all, end-all of the academic literary world because they study Shakespeare. And it is about group think, and it is about kind of like this following mentality. It is about the ways in which we create feelings of self-importance, and it is also about Shakespeare. Who was Shakespeare? This author has some unorthodox ideas about who Shakespeare was. And yes, she does believe that Shakespeare was an Italian poet, female woman. She makes a case for that. But before she even begins making a case for that, she makes a case against the bard as we know him, the Stratford man. It is a really, really strong case. And I'm already here for it. Since I was a teen, I've been, kind of Camp De Vere, but there's a lot to be said as I got older, as I started teaching it, and teaching Shakespeare. And now these past 3 years that I've been reading Shakespeare every month with a group of people who are thinking about Shakespeare, some from a very purist, the bard point of view, and some from an extremely agnostic, like someone wrote them, but who knows who that was sort of view. All the spectrum, like we're talking about them and we're talking about authorship and we're questioning authorship and we're looking at the plays and thinking, there is no way that a man who didn't teach his own daughters to read and write whose own wife couldn't sign her name, is writing women like this. There's no way. So there's a ton of interesting information out there. I do think that Shakespeare, the Stratfordian, is that a word? Is an important historical figure, but I think he's a ruse. I think he's a false front for maybe one, maybe many, maybe men, maybe women. I'm not sure. I don't want to say that I know, especially after reading this book that challenges people who say they know in any way, shape, or form, including the author who believes that it's this woman, but doesn't know for sure. The book is written so well. It's so engaging. It's funny. And it is glib, and it is informative, and the arguments are presented and built in an incredibly logical and methodical way. The kinds of people, she's interviewing, Shakespeare scholars. She's also interviewing Shakespeare actors. She's interviewing the keepers of the globe. She's interviewing psychiatrists. She's interviewing cult specialists. It's such a great book. Highly recommend. I will definitely, excuse me, allergies. I will definitely be ordering a physical copy of this when it comes out in May, just to support her, but also eventually to reread it in a non-Kindle format because wow, it is a tour de force. It is a tour de force. I love it. I absolutely love it. Super fun, and really kind of challenging at the same time. Top tier book for me. I also really loved The Whistling Season by Ivan Doig. This was one of those 12 by 12 books. So many of these books have ended up on my favorites. I'm so glad that, late in December, early in January, I saw on Facebook and on Instagram, on Bookstagram, that people had these little charts and they were like, ask 12 friends to recommend 12 books for you to read, one a month over the course of the year. And I thought, yeah, this will be interesting. This will be good. I didn't know that my friends read such great books that I'd never heard of before. But so far, they have been amazing picks for me. And this one was no different. My friend Darla picked stuff all over me. My friend Darla picked this one for me to read because her father grew up in the same area that this book takes place, and it felt like a really close thing to her. And Darla and I have a long history. We met in college. Our dorm rooms were right next to each other, and eventually we ended up sharing apartments and houses, and we are bonded because of that. We haven't seen each other in decades, but through the magic of social media, we are able to keep in touch. And she shared some of her own self with me in the sharing of this book. And then as she picked it up to start to read it, after she realized she had recommended it, she picked it up to start to reread it. And she was like, oh no, I don't think anything happens in this book. I think that it's maybe boring. I don't know. And she kind of wanted to retract her suggestion. And I was like, nope, I'm going to read it anyway. And I'm so glad that I did, because this book is phenomenal. It's hilarious. It's compelling. It's heartfelt. It is the growing up family story of turn of the century Montana, a town, and some mysterious strangers that show up under strange circumstances to be the housekeeper and the teacher in this town. And there is such a huge, shocking plot twist at the end that you don't see coming, because everything is so slow slice of life, really wonderful, really endearing, really hilarious, really challenging, really believable, everyday stuff happening. All through, yes, some plot, but mostly really excellent character and setting development. And then bam, all this stuff explodes, and it's awesome. It's so awesome. It's so awesome that I decided that I wanted to read the next book in the series this month. So in April. So I'm going to be doing that. And I'm an Ivan Doig fan for life now. And I didn't know this, but he's from the city, or he settled in the city that I currently live in. And he's kind of like an author laureate for the city that I currently live in. And I had no idea. I'd seen his name in books, in bookstores on shelves. Never read anything by him. It looked like he wrote Westerns, which he does. And I didn't think that was for me, but I'm learning now, because I just finished reading Lone Women as well. And I'm learning that I really love a good Western if it's really well told. I like that setting. And I didn't anticipate loving this book. I thought that I would like it because my friend recommended it, but I didn't know that I would love it, and I did. And I highly recommend it. Again, it's kind of slow. It kind of has, real gentle pacing. I'll say gentle. It's gentle. And then things start happening and you're laughing out loud because the descriptions of these characters and the ways that they respond to things are very insightful, and you're in on the joke that's being told about humanity, right? Over and over again. And then all of a sudden, boom, plot kicks in, and it's just like a wild ride to the end. Yeah, really, really excellent. Please read. Fourth favorite book of the month was The Rose and Thistle by Lori France. Let's double check that, because this was a Kindle book as well. The Rose and Laura France. So Laura France is an author, in January of 2021, I read A Bound Heart by Lauren France. And I had a physical copy of it, and I had purchased it from, I think, probably Book Outlet, because it was probably cheap, but also because the cover just really got me. And I knew that I was getting a Christian fiction. I grew up on Christian fiction. I think I've said before, Bethany House was my house. I used to read Christian fiction like poppin' Skittles, right? And I absolutely loved it as a teenager. And then as I started to read books that weren't Christian fiction, I started to realize that the quality of writing in Christian fiction often leaves something to be desired. Really, truly, please don't come at me if you just take an objective view. You will also agree that although you may really enjoy the stories, the writing itself is often quite poor, quite poor. I knew that I was getting a Christian fiction book, and I will reread favorites from that genre and that time period in my life because of the nostalgia. Like, I'll reread a Janet Oak, sure, why not? But I don't generally tend to pick up new Christian fiction because the writing tends to annoy me. I can't get into it. I can't forget that I'm reading because I'm really editing. And so I did get this one because the cover was just so enticing, and I read it and I loved it. I loved it. It was just good, solid, faith-based historical fiction that was written so well. And I was excited to find an author in the Christian fiction genre that I could read without constantly judging. And I know that makes me sound terrible, but it's the truth. It's how I would read Christian fiction now. But I loved it. And so when I saw that there was the Rose and the Thistle on NetGalley, I got the advanced reader copy. Now, this book is already out at this point. It's been out. It was out before I got around to reading it. So I did not have the chance to review it before it was released, but I did have the chance to read it after it had been released. I read my advanced reader copy on my Kindle, and I loved this book. It is about the same time period I keep reading about. I'm reading so many books that are adjacent to the Outlander series. And I'm not doing it on purpose. I think I'm just drawn to that space, that time period. And it takes place in the same kind of setting. And it is about a young woman who is Catholic at a time in England when it's your life if you're Catholic. So her father sends her to hide in the house of her godfather in Scotland, who is not Catholic and is loyal to the current crown that is making Catholicism not okay, and finds out that when she arrives after a very harrowing journey, that her godfather has died. And so his son, who knows nothing about her, she thinks, has to find a way to keep her safe and to provide for her what his father would have provided for her. But he's also mourning. And of course, there's a love story. There's a lot of intrigue, political intrigue, family drama, really endearing moments. And it was great. It was a fast, fun, wild historical fiction read that was well written with believable characters that do believable things, have real human responses to situations, and faith-based. So if that is something that is important to you as a reader, then I highly suggest you pick up some Laura France. I think she's one of the best out there. And finally, this one may come as a bit of a surprise to see on my 5 favorite reads of the month because I didn't rate it very high. My 5 things review of this was actually a little bit negative. But as I sat down today to figure out which books have stuck with me over the course of the month, this, I have to say, stuck with me. I stand by my star rating, but I also have to say that the experience of reading this book was a favorite experience of the month, and that is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This was my book of the month pick that I read in March, and it was a February book club pick, book of the month club pick, but I read them the month after they come out. So I read it. And I judged it, and I stand by my judgment that it is off the rails, weird, unbelievable, checklisty. Like, it's got all of it's like the author sat down and was like, I need to make this, politically correct for all the people who may be picking this up. Everybody has to see themselves in this book, and that's okay, but it was so blatant and oftentimes unnaturally placed into the narrative that it felt like a checklist, right? I think everybody should be able to see themselves in books at some point, but not everybody should be able to see everybody in every book they read, right? That's not life. That's not realistic. And so it felt a little bit task-oriented, the writing at times. And also, I feel like the ending completely contradicted the whole overarching metaphor of the book, the extended metaphor, the message, the theme. The ending, the way it ends, is just nullifies everything. I don't want to tell you what happens or anything really about the book except the basic premise, which is it's a thriller, and there are two friends, who have had a falling out, and the falling out seems very, very big and important. And I think this is one of the flaws of the book. But the falling out is incredible, and they haven't talked to each other in a long time. And through a series of events, they both end up being invited to be part of a series of believable events. Okay. They both end up being invited to be a part of this small group of women who are going to a writer's retreat at the haunted / demon-possessed home of a quirky, unpredictable thriller writer that they both idolize. And so they're going to go and spend a month writing at this woman's house under this woman's tutelage. Her name is Rosa, or maybe Rosa. It's Roza. And she's a live wire. She's unpredictable. From the moment you meet her, you realize she completely cannot be pinned down. You, the reader, don't know what's going on with her, and they, the people, don't know what's going on with her. Plus, there's this whole history of the house, which has a history of a woman doing a seance, inviting a demon into her life. The demon wants to use her to paint pictures. Her husband's kind of against that, and she's kind of for it. And things have happened in that house in the past in relation to this experience. So there's creatives in the past who channeled things and had arguments about that. And then you're in the present, and you've got a live wire writer who writes about really scary things, who chose this house because of its past. And you're stuck there with your enemy. You're stuck there with your enemy, and it's fun times. It's fun times in the reading of the book. The premise of this book is so wonderful. It's so wonderful. And then it just goes crazy. However, like I said, I think it is one of my favorite reading experiences of the month. Am I gonna say that this is a wonderful read and everybody should read it and I can recommend it left and right? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think it's terrible writing. Terrible writing. Superb premise. Terrible writing. Really fun reading experience. So yeah, I poorly rated, but one of my favorite reads of the month. So there they are. Now let's do the glory that is the March wrap-up game. So I read a total of, I think, 32 books in the month of March. Remember, a lot of those were middle grade March. And if you want to see middle grade March in isolation and hear about every book that I read, I do have a middle grade March reading vlog up on my channel that you can watch to hear more about those. But I read, I think, 32 books, maybe 35. I'd have to check. As I read them, I spun a spinner wheel to assign a number 1 through 50 that correlates to a different reading prompt, and I put their titles in a spinner wheel. I took the number of books I read and divided that by half and put that in a spinner wheel and let a number be generated, and I had to respond to 7 reading prompts about different books this month. So we've got 7 questions to answer. When I spun the wheel for the first of 7 questions, Blood of Wonderland by Colleen Oakes was chosen, and the number associated with that book was 5. And the question that is number 5 is, what was your favorite read and what made it so good? And that, of course, is Katherine Center's Hello Stranger. And I've already gushed about it, so I won't spend any more time gushing. I will simply say that this book is just a breath of light-hearted, wonderful, fresh air with some depth. Read it. It's lovely. Then I spun the wheel and landed on The Winter of the Witch, the number associated with it is 12. And the question, which is number 12, is which book is set closest to your current location? I had to do some looking up this time. I couldn't just make a guess. There wasn't an obvious choice. There were several that it could be, but it ended up being The Whistling Season by Ivan Doig, which takes place in Butte, or just outside of Butte, Montana. I've already gushed about this book as well. Lola is growling at people. She doesn't know which one to growl at. There are two people going two different directions. And now she's bugling. Hey, Bugle baby. Can you not? No. Okay. Can I finish? One of the people she was barking at was the UPS guy, and he dropped off a brand new ducky for her because she decapitated her other ducky. Decapitated. Out of love. It was a love decapitation, but it happened. So we ordered a new ducky. Luckily, her favorite toy is one of the cheapest stuffy toys there is for dogs. So, did you get a new ducky? Does he still have his head? Does that ducky still have his head? Yes, he does. She can decapitate as many of them as she wants. She's over the moon to have Ducky back. And I am thankful to Amazon for same-day delivery. Anyway, here we go. We were talking about The Whistling Season by Ivan Doig, which was the book the setting was located closest to my current physical location. And that was Butte, Montana. And I've already spoken about this one at length, loved it. And yeah, I won't say anything more about that one for now, but you should read it. It's great. Then I spun the wheel again and The Ruins came up, which was number 45. The number associated with it is 45. And that question is, which books share a common theme? So for that, I picked 2 middle grade March books, and that is The Keeper of the Lost Cities and The Moor Child. These are both about fairy children living in the human world and trying to find themselves. But I also picked The Ruins, The Sewing Girl's Tale, and Madam as books that have similar themes. So The Ruins and Madam, as you can see, are both by Phoebe Wynn, and they're a little bit of a companion piece because I didn't know that until I finished reading The Ruins. So Madam I read in 2020, I believe, maybe 2019, but I think 2020. It is about a school for girls isolated in Scotland and the crazy things that happen there. And then I read The Ruins by Phoebe Wynn, which was a book that I had intended to read last summer, but just couldn't do it because it felt so heavy and dark after, as I keep mentioning. But I will keep mentioning until I'm done reading all these books, but it was the summer that my soul animal, my dog, Joey, had to pass away. And so I didn't read it. I didn't read The Ruins, and I added it to my TBR from my own shelf for the month of March. And I was having a really hard time reading it. It is incredibly dark, but it's also extremely well written. And in the end, there is an allusion to the school that Madam takes place at. And because of reading The Ruins, I had to then reread Madam. So even though it wasn't on my TBR and even though it was a reread, I did reread it and I absolutely loved it this time around. In fact, I ended up raising it a whole star rating or book stack rating. The Ruins, The Sewing Girl's Tale. The Sewing Girl's Tale is another one of those books that I read because of not being able to read it last summer. And it is a nonfiction about a court trial in Revolutionary America when a family of a young woman who is basically human trafficked for a night takes the man to court, and the repercussions of that and the outcome of that, and the similarities between how nothing much has significantly changed about the way victims are believed or not believed. I mean, I could have been reading Know My Name. It could have been the same story. But this one took place in Revolutionary America, and that one took place a couple of years ago. So, The Ruins, The Sewing Girl's Tale, and Madam all have in common a theme of the way society uses particularly teenage girls. And none of them are pretty, but all of them are important. And all of them are extremely well done. I think Phoebe Wynn is an excellent writer. I think that if you only read The Ruins or you only read Madam, you don't have a clear picture of who she is as a writer. I think she maybe doesn't have a clear picture yet of who she is as a writer. But when you read these two together, you can see how very excellent she is at setting, character development, and gothic. She gets a gothic vibe despite the setting. I mean, you may think, yeah, it's easy to get that gothic vibe at an all-girls school in the Scottish Highlands, totally locked away from everybody else. That has gothic written all over it from the get-go. But The Ruins takes place in southern France, in the sun, and it's gothic. It is gothic. Highly recommend all three of them, except know going in that you should look for trigger warnings for all three of them, because all three of them are rife with the horrible things that people do to people. And then I have this set, which is The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis and Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies. These two share a theme because they are both literary in nature. And finally, I paired The Ivy Tree with The Writing Retreat because both of these are about deception. They are about long game deception. They're both super dark. So that is my response to which books share a common theme. Then I spun the wheel again. It was The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place, The Mysterious Howling by Mary Rose Wood, and the number associated with that was 16. The question, which is number 16, is find a book with white on the cover and share 3 things about it. I was pretty limited. I didn't have a whole lot of books with white on the cover, so I chose the most obvious choice, The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by Rachel Joyce. 3 things about this book: it will make you cry, it will make you laugh, and it's a hard read. It's a hard read. It's about a man and his wife who are just kind of chugging along. Nothing's quite right, nothing's quite wrong. And Harold receives a note from an old friend saying she's dying of cancer. And Harold writes a response and walks to the mailbox and doesn't stop walking, and ends up doing a pilgrimage to get to her. Her name is Queenie, to get to Queenie. And he believes that if he just keeps walking, she won't die until he sees her. And so it's about him and kind of the way that walking helps him come back to life. You learn about who Queenie is in his life. And there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of redemption. It's a really beautiful book, but you will laugh, you will cry. You will cry. I don't care if you think you're not a crier, you will cry. And it's a really hard book to read. I am reading The Love Song of Queenie Hennessy, I think that's what it's called, which is the second book, companion to The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. Rachel Joyce wrote one of my favorite books of last year. I think last year or the year before. I don't know. Years are turning into meldy things, but I think it was last year, which was, I have it right here, which was Miss Benson's Beetle. And this still feels vastly superior to me to The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, but I think it's just that I related to the character of Miss Benson more than I related to the character of Harold Fry. I think that probably Queen Hennessy is going to hit real hard. And then the month after that, I will read Maureen, which will be the last book in that collection. They're companions, not necessarily straight up like series. Then I spun the wheel again and I got Im and the Big Whom, which was, it's by Jerry Pinto, and it was my 12 and 12 Bookstagram friend pick. The question associated with that is choose a book and pair it with a piece of art. So I chose The Secret History of Home Economics by Danielle Dralinger, I think is how you say it. And I paired it with this Norman Rockwell, which feels very traditional to me, picture of Ruby Bridges going to school, being escorted into school with the tomato in the background. And I did this because this book is about what we now consider to be kind of a traditional and maybe derogatory sort of relegating of women to home economics. But it's not about that at all. It's about the hidden history of home economics, the secret history, what it came out of, what it was being used for, who actually was into home economics. So many men, don't relegate it to women. But it was controversial. And I chose to read this book because I had read and loved in January chemistry about Zot. I can't remember the name of the book. Hang on. Lessons in Chemistry, which is about the chemist Elizabeth Zott, fictional chemist Elizabeth Zott, who I think is based on a real person from my reading of The Secret History of Home Economics, who ends up using a cooking show as a subversive activity. Her knowledge of chemistry, her self-reliance, and the invitation to teach on this cooking show about nutrition as a means of setting people free. And I think that the Norman Rockwell painting really matches well with that. I spun the wheel again and it came to I Capture the Castle, which was a reread for me, which I absolutely loved and enjoyed. The number 26 was associated with this one, and that question is, which two books were most disparate? Which two were least like each other? And for the answer to this, I chose The Rose and the Thistle, which I've already spoken about, and The Writing Retreat, which I've also already spoken about. No two books could be less alike, I think. I spun the wheel and I got Meredith Alone, which was another advanced reader copy that I read by Claire Alexander, and I really loved this book. It was great. It is about a woman dealing with agoraphobia, having to make friendships. It was a little bit Eleanor Olephantish, which I was hoping it would be, but it was dark. It definitely was dark, but not in the same way that Eleanor Oliphant was, in a more believable, if you ask me, way. There is just so much triumph at the end of this book, so I want to give a plug to it as well. This one was which book had the best ending. So the question associated with Meredith Alone was which book had the best ending. This is our last question, and the answer is The Ruins by Phoebe Wynne. And that is because when you get to the end of this book, if you haven't read Madam, you will not understand all of the context of the ending of this book. However, you will have an ending to the book. If you have read Madam and you understand the context, the ending of the book reads entirely differently for a person who has not read Madam and doesn't have that context. One reads happy and one reads horrifying, and I won't tell you which is which. The end of the book was a complete surprise to me. The icing on the cake was the way that Phoebe Wynn wove these two worlds together and created this feeling of reality for this fiction. It lent it this like air of credibility, and it was just unexpected. And it changed actually my whole experience with The Ruins. The Ruins, I thought, was a well-written, horrifying work of fiction. Really well written, just detestable, just full of detestable, awful people doing detestable, awful things, awful things to each other, leading it to detestable results. Think, what's that line from The Great Gatsby where it's like they smash each other up and they just don't care. And that's very much what this is. It's about a bunch of wealthy people just ruining life. I'm not selling it. I don't think that it's a highly recommendable book. I really don't. But I also think that having read Madam, which I think is a superior story, and then seeing it like inserted in The Ruins was a big game changer for me with this book. It made me respect it a lot more, and it made me think, wow, I'm going to read everything that Phoebe Wynn puts out. Brilliant, because one reading of it, it doesn't matter if you know. If you know, you know. If you don't know, it doesn't matter. And one reading is hopeful and one reading is devastating. And they both coexist together in the same moment. So, best ending. And this concludes my wrap-up game and 5 favorites for the month of March. What a weird month. If you want to know, like, reading-wise, so crazy wild, like, with the darkness and the middle grade, like, never the twain shall meet, apparently. If you want to know how middle grade March reading went, I do have a reading vlog up about that, and I talk about each of the books. It's not the greatest vlog in the world because I was a pretty terrible vlogger, but I do talk about every single middle grade book that I read in the month of March. So if you want those in isolation, feel free to watch that. There's different content in that than in this video. And this is my wrap up mainly, although I think I did mention a couple of middle grades, but this is my wrap up mainly of the non-middle grade associated books that I read. Again, here is the books that I read in the month, and if I didn't talk about any of them that you are interested in hearing my thoughts on, you can always head to my Goodreads account. The link is in the link tree in the comment below. You can go to my Goodreads account and read my written reviews. You can go to my Bookstagram, the link is in the link tree below, and see the same exact 5 things reviews for every book that I read, except for 2, because I'm a little bit behind, but they'll be there soon. Yeah, so if there's a book that I didn't talk about that I didn't wrap up here, you can find my thoughts on it. Or you can just ask me if you see a book on that grid and you're like, hey, what did you think of the Ivy Tree? You didn't say anything about it. Ask me. I'll tell you. I love to have a conversation about books. And that is it. I am going to go and read. Let's go read. Thanks for being here. Bye.